Well, I'm so glad you all came today. We're going to be talking about how to improve your learning, and we're going to focus mostly on taking lecture notes and then learning the material from your lecture notes in terms of the processes that you use to start the learning process. First of all, I know you sometimes feel this way, right? Your brain is full, too much to learn. I love Funky Winkerbean's comic strip. His tips for taking test scores: always take notes, always be punctual. I guess he got a little bit confused. Always brush after every meal, right. You never know when you'll be faced with an oral exam. So what's your goal? Good grades? You want to improve your grades? That's usually what everybody focuses on as being important when you go to college. Course credit, you need to graduate, you need credit in this course in order to go on in your degree. And of course, degree is the big goal. But understand that each one of these things are simply a proxy for your employers that you have learned how to learn. They look at your grades, they look at what courses you've taken, they look at the fact that you have a degree, but what that information conveys to them is that you know how to learn. So the real strategy has to be learning how to learn. So what you've done in the past is you've maximized your ability to learn things short term, right? You work on something, stay up all night, you cram, you walk in to take the test, and then you hope that you're not going to lose it before the test is over, right? And then what happens after the test? You forget it, right? Because you've already done the test. You got the grade, it's over, done with, and forgotten. Except it isn't forgotten. It can't be forgotten. You need to learn how to learn things in terms of long-term memory. What's really important is the ability to learn, to analyze, and to reach valid conclusions. These are the skills that employers want you to walk away with. Now, there's something called Bloom's taxonomy of intellectual thinking skills. One of the things we always talk about is analysis. You need to be able to do analysis, and a lot of students don't understand what that is. Well, the base knowledge that this is Benjamin Bloom in 1956 came up with the domain of cognitive thinking skills. What he said was the first requirement that you have to have is you have to have knowledge. And I thought, wait a minute, isn't that the goal? We're going to learn stuff, right? No, he said that's the beginning step. That's the first necessary condition. You have to learn terminology, concepts, assumptions, theories. You've got to learn all these pieces before you can progress any further. It isn't sufficient to learn 80% of it. Yeah, that might get you a B on a test that's just testing on factual stuff, but it isn't going to be sufficient to get you to the end result of where you need to be. So it is just the first step, and we're going to talk about ways to improve your ability to learn stuff. The next step is comprehension, understanding. It isn't enough to just memorize stuff. I can tell immediately when a student has memorized a definition, but they don't understand what it really means because they can't use the term correctly. If you don't understand what it means, if you don't connect it with something that you know, then you don't really get it. And here's the nice thing about understanding. If you understand what you've learned, it makes remembering the pieces of information easier. It's harder to remember stuff you don't really have a clue as to what it's about. So when you are studying, you need to make sure that you're going for that light bulb moment, that you're going for the understanding. And if you don't get it, that means you need to go back to the textbook. You need to visit with a classmate and figure out what's going on here. I don't get it, until you get it, and then you're able to go forward. Once you know stuff, once you understand what it means, the next step is to be able to apply it. Knowledge is absolutely worthless if you have memorized stuff, but you don't know how to apply it to a new situation. In high school, a lot of tests focused on these two levels. In college, many times we begin with the application level. So when you're learning something, you have to understand it so well that if I give you a new situation, you know how it fits. You can take what you've learned and think through it and apply it to a new situation. This is the level, you know, in math when you had to deal with word problems. Were you like me? I hated word problems. It's like, just give me the math. I can work through the math. I can do the math. But word problems, you have to think, right? Which steps do you need to employ? Which approach do you need to take? What's going to be the best way to do it? So application, notice, requires that you know stuff and that you understand it, because you cannot apply it unless you know the basics and you understand how they work. So once you've mastered the application level, you're doing better. You're making progress here. The next level is analysis. Now, as you especially get into your junior and senior level classes, you're going to be asked to do analysis. And I can remember being very puzzled. My professor would say, "You didn't do any analysis on this." And I'm thinking, okay, what do you mean by that? To do analysis, it means you look at cause and effect. If this happens, what's the result? If I change this piece, how will it affect the outcome? So one of the things that you do as you're studying is you begin to look at how the pieces fit together. Another part of analysis is, what are all the components and what is the relationship between all those components? If one of your methods of study is to make flashcards and memorize terms so that you can do this knowledge piece, what you miss is the analysis part of it. How do all those pieces of information fit together? That's a really important part of the big picture. And sometimes it's a step of learning that you can't develop right away. You have to have several lectures and then go back and look at it all to see how it all fits together. All right? After analysis comes synthesis. Whenever you learn something, you put it into your body of knowledge. You mesh it with everything that you know, everything that you've learned, everything that you've experienced in your life. So your classes are not silos of information. What you learn in one class is going to impact what you are learning and understanding in another class. And sometimes when you're in one class, you'll get this revelation of, oh my gosh, that's how this piece in economics connects to what I learned in sociology or history, and now I understand how all that fits together. Your economics professor did not make that connection for you. How did you do that? You pulled information that you learned in the class and you synthesized it with stuff you already knew about. This is where we become truly educated. We're learning about the world that we live in, and we're pulling all the information in to make ourselves an educated person. But let me pose a question to you. If you aren't very good at retaining information long term, and you haven't mastered comprehension or application or analysis, what do you have to synthesize with? Where do the light bulbs go off? Do you have any light bulbs? No, they're gone. Do you see how you miss an incredible opportunity to develop your learning? I had the opportunity of reading a biography on Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt during the White House years called No Ordinary Time. And when I was taking history, I would have been looking at it of, okay, here are the dates, blah, blah, blah. But as an economist, as I started reading it, I began to see how he reorganized the resources to get ready for World War II. I had a totally different takeaway from that because I synthesized what I was learning in that book with what I already know about economics, what I realized I didn't know about history. And it really stuck with me. So when you are learning new stuff, you need to be synthesizing with everything you know to be true. And that's how you're going to build depth of learning. So what's the whole point to this whole process? Is evaluation, judgment, making decisions. When you walk out of the university, you're going to be tasked with solving problems for your employer. You're going to have job responsibilities, and issues are going to come up. I will promise you, none of the problems you're going to deal with were addressed in one of your classes. These are going to be new problems. How are you going to solve them? How are you going to work through them? Well, you're going to start by gathering the facts. You're going to make sure you understand those facts. You're going to apply them to the current situation. You're going to do an analysis. If we take this approach, this will be the result. But if we take this approach, this will be the result. You're going to synthesize your analysis with everything you know about your business, your colleagues' strengths, your skills, your market that you're working in, the economy that you're in. And then you're going to come up with a decision. And you're going to go to your boss and say, okay, here's what I propose as the solution. Let me ask you a question. How good is your solution if you're not really skilled at all of these levels? You're not going to come up with a good solution. So in order to be able to perform in the future, you've got to be thinking of a deeper goal than just the grade in this class, just the credit for this class, or even just the degree. You are becoming educated. And if you have that as your goal, you are going to change the way you approach your learning. You're going to stop learning superficially and start learning deeply. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So what's the biggest hurdle in reaching your goals? You sometimes feel like this, overwhelmed with everything you have to do. What do you guys think is the biggest problem? Procrastination. Anybody have trouble with that? I still deal with it. I still deal with it. Well, yes, you're right. Procrastination is the biggest problem. Oh, wait. Do we get distracted? Yes. Do you have competing demands for your time? We're a multitasking society now, right? You've got cell phones, text messages, social networks, got to keep up with all that stuff. You are being pulled in 100 different directions, which makes your task much more difficult than when I was growing up. I didn't have all these distractions. I didn't even have HBO. All I had was television or the radio. My mother would say, turn off the radio when you're studying. Do you see how you've got lots more that you have to deal with? So you've got to make decisions what you're going to do. So time management is the key. How you use your time is going to determine whether your goal is a real goal or it's a fantasy. If you have a goal and you are not actually spending your hours towards reaching that goal, it's not a goal, it's a fantasy. If it's a real goal, you will actually commit your time to reaching that goal. So I'm going to give you an overview of a couple of steps that I want you to take. This is very important. Before class, read your textbook. A lot of students are in the habit of going to class is an introduction, and then they think they're going to go back and read the textbook later and understand the textbook later. Well, you're losing an opportunity of learning how to pull information out of a textbook yourself. Learning how to read isn't just about reading the words, it's understanding the content. Learning how to pull the important stuff out of that material yourself. So read your textbook. Many of the students that I see are not big readers. If you do read, you read short blips, right? Tweets. Man, has that ruined us? Text messages. Has that ruined us? Even the internet. You get your news in short little blips. Do you read long articles and have to figure out how all of this relates to the conclusion? That is a developed skill. And the only way you can develop it is by reading your textbook. We'll do another workshop later on how to pull material out of a textbook to help you get it. All right, so next, in class, you need to focus. We're not multitasking. Turn those cell phones off, put them away. If you have a laptop, do not turn it on to network stuff. You only use it to take notes so that the temptation is put away. You want to take lots of notes. If you are writing, you are actively engaged. Writing is very active. Listening is very passive. So writing down lots of stuff keeps your brain focused on the topic. Do you have trouble with your brain sometimes wandering because it's boring? You have to learn the self-discipline to keep yourself plugged in even when it's boring. So So you're going to take lots of notes. Ask questions. If you've read the text and you go through class and you still aren't clear, now you know you need a little extra help. Class time is the time to ask questions. If you haven't read the text, you don't really know that you don't get it, because you tell yourself, oh, I'll just go back and read the text, figure it out later on my own. Well, that takes a lot more time. It's efficient to ask questions in class, get that thing nailed down before you go forward. After class, very important, you want to work on your class notes before you go to bed. We lose about 50% of everything that's in short-term memory within 24 hours. So let's say you have a Tuesday, Thursday class. You read the text, you take good class notes, you go to class, and then you wait 5 days to look at them. How much have you got left? Almost nothing. What does that mean? You have to start over. Is that efficient? No, you've lost the benefit of everything you've learned in that class. When you walk out of that class, you got a lot of stuff in your short-term memory. Many times we aren't able to get it all down. But if you take care of pulling those notes together right after class, you can add extra pieces of information. You can add clarifications. You can see connections of things that you didn't see when you were taking the notes. So we're going to look at some techniques to revise your notes afterwards. And you're going to start learning it as you do your revision. So that's a quick overview. But basically, you need to remember, you got to plan enough time. You need to plan out about 2 hours of class preparation for every hour that you're in class. So if you have a 3-hour class, that means you need 6 hours for that one class to adequately prepare. That's tough, especially for those of you who are in athletics. You have real time management issues that you're dealing with. All right, so let's talk about some good note-taking strategies. First of all, do we use a spiral notebook or a 3-ring binder? Well, most of the literature I say always says use a 3-ring binder. When I was in school, I chose not to. But I had to get a spiral notebook that was big enough because I take lots of notes. But I also had to get one that had pockets, so if I got handouts, I had a place to keep my handouts with the material. So that's the benefit of a spiral notebook, because I didn't have to worry about losing my notes or getting them out of order. If you've got a 3-ring binder, then you've got to be really careful that they don't get out of order and that you keep them all together. But it doesn't matter. Whichever one you do, just make sure you follow these steps. Make sure that your course rubric, if it's 3-ring binder, you need to make sure you have Econ 2311, English 1313. You need the date of the lecture and you need the page number for that date. That helps you keep those pages in order. You need to have a chapter topic on the top of each page. You may not do that until you go back and revise your notes, so that as you're flipping through to find information, you can easily find the section that you're looking for. The basic format's going to be a modified outline. You want the main idea close to the margin, and then indent. Don't bother with Roman numerals. You can use dashes, bullets, underlinings for main topics. You want to skip lines so it's not all crammed together. You want something that's easy to see visually when you go back and review it. It also gives you room to add in extra information when you go back and revise your notes. Sometimes the professor in class will give an opinion on something that may contradict other opinions or fact, or you need to indicate that. If the information is given to you as fact or theory that's accepted, then you say that. But in the margin, you might want to put an abbreviation like OP for opinion, or put it in a bracket so that you know this is the professor's opinion. I do that a lot of times in economics because there's lots of competing ideas, and I'll say, okay, I disagree with the book here because. So you need to indicate that in your notes so you can differentiate with that. Many times professors teach using the Socratic Method. They'll ask a question. Write the question down, because I promise you, you will probably see that question again later. As the professor goes through answering, evaluating students' answers, and finally comes up to an answer that's the good answer, make sure you write that question down. When I first went to school, I thought, oh, the professor wants to see if everybody knows the material. No, it's a teaching method. So make sure you're including that in your notes. A lot of students don't write down examples. Write down examples. Again, you're going to write down as much as you can. You're going to be active. You're going to be busy. A lot of test questions say include an example. It's nice to have some to refresh your memory when you're going back and studying. Sometimes the reference is made to a page in the book. Write down the page number so you can go back and look at it and synthesize that with your class notes. If the page was mentioned, then it's important. Also, sharpen your listening skills. You're going to have to be listening for clue words that are given. When the professor says, there are 3 reasons why, okay, that means get ready. So you're going to write down a topic. The why is going to be the topic, and then number 1, 2, 3 as you write down the 3 reasons. A main idea is going to be delivered in terms of words that say this is a main idea. That means that topic's going to go close to the margin, and everything explaining that idea is going to be indented. These are words that introduce examples. On the other hand, compare and contrast, right? For example, in contrast, furthermore, for instance. So those clue you as an example. Put EX period, and then you've got your example in your notes. Therefore, in conclusion, as a result, finally, these are conclusions, and you need to note that in your notes because conclusions are pretty important. So one of the things you're going to be doing as you listen in class to lecture is you've got to really sharpen those listening skills and be watching for these key words. If you're lucky, professor will say, you're going to see this again, right? Meaning, this is going to be on the test. That means put a big star by it, right? This is something you need to really make sure you remember. Now, here's an example of an outline that was taken. I know you can't read the detail on it, but you can see the format. Notice that lines are skipped. It makes it easier to read, so you can go through and quickly read through this. You've got a handout on your desk that we're going to use that as an example to show how we're going to revise our notes. But these were notes that were taken in class. Basically what we're doing is we're comparing 2 forms of government, federalism and unitary governments. And I would probably go back and retitle that as 2 forms or 2 types of government, right? And that may not be something that you think of during class, but after class, you can go in and revise it. So now we're going to look at our steps in learning. We're going to use the acronym OARS to remember what are the steps in learning. All right, the O in OARS is for organize. The best way that the brain remembers information is if it's organized. If you have a class where you're going to go 4 weeks of lecture and then you have an exam, you've got 25 pages of notes, our brains don't recall that. You do not remember stuff that's sequential. You have to organize it into groups. So one of the way we're going to start this organization is by reviewing our class notes right after class before the end of day. So on your handout, what I've got here is an example of the 2-column method. Notice that in the left-hand column, I've gone back and added some topics in this. Let's see. Here we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to label that information. So federalism and its significance, source of authority. So it's kind of like a question, right? Unitary government, example. And this is going to be really helpful. Here's another thing that I would do. Put boxes for major topics. It makes it easy for you to scan and see the major topics as you go through your notes. Use color. Color really helps. Once you get it all organized, you understand all of it, you're going to start the learning process immediately. You're going to fold the page over like this. You're going to look at those topics and you're going to see if you can recall what the information is. So you're starting the learning process right then. You're beginning to put information into long-term memory. Now, 5 days from now, you may not remember it, but that's okay. Every time you go through and repeat this, more of it's going to start sticking. It takes lots of repetition for it to actually stick. But you start at the beginning, you start learning what you can learn, and then you put it away. And that's it. Okay? We talked about making corrections, additions. You want to find main ideas, put them in a box, highlight them. You're going to list, number, or group ideas. As you go through and read through everything, you're going to have a better understanding of how everything starts fitting together, so you can add other comments. Here's what I showed you as you revise. Labeling the concepts, vocabulary, and topics in the margin. This is called the 2-column method. And this is how you're going to start your study process. Do you see how efficient this is? You don't have to redo flashcards and study sheets, right? Because this is your study sheet, is your notes. And you're going to use your notes to start the learning process right away. So this is a really helpful way to do this. Now, I had a class in managerial finance in my undergraduate program. Professor talked really fast. Some students say I talk really fast. And it was hard to write everything down. So right after class, another student and I would get together and we would take turns reading our notes to each other. And we found she'd pick up a little detail that I had missed, and sometimes vice versa. So we would go through and we would straighten up our notes together. But what we were doing, we're practicing. We're speaking it out loud to each other. So we're already starting the practice. And just doing that started the learning process, but it also meant that our notes were clear and we understood them. We met those first two basic requirements. So working with another classmate right after class, good idea. And then you're going to begin the learning process by reciting out loud. Once you've made your 2 columns, you're going to go through. First recite it out loud. You know, if you think it, it's not going to stick as well. When you say it, you remember it better. So first you recite it out loud until you think you know it. Then you test yourself. Can you come up with it? And then you put it aside. All right, so this is going to take some time. You've got to plan some time after every class to do this for every class that you have that day. Now, each week, at the end of the week, you need to go back through all your pages of notes, and you need to begin to start organizing all the stuff you're learning in the class. Think about in a computer file, right? You've got a Word file, and you've got a folder, and inside that folder are more folders. So what we're going to do by developing a topic sheet is we're going to just do a snapshot of what are all the major topics that we've studied. And then within each folder, there's going to be a lot of information. The information that you have in your lecture notes from each day. But you need to start looking at an overview of everything that you've studied. Because when you get to a test and you get to a question, the first thing your brain does is start reviewing everything you covered. And if you've got this topic sheet, you immediately go to the topic sheet and you say, aha, this question is about that part on the topic sheet. And then it's like you go to that folder and you open it up, what did we study on that topic? And you just sort it out until you get down to the detail that you need. That is one way to combat that brain freeze that you get on a test when you know it, but you can't find it, right? So topic sheet is very important on getting all this information organized, and you do it each week. Second step, associate with things that you know. It's so much easier to remember dates if you can connect it to something else that you know happened around that time. So you develop a timeline. It's easy to remember something if you can relate it to another class that you've already had. This helps you to understand the information, not just to memorize it. You're going to link it to something that you know. You can use rhymes. I got so tickled when I took a group of students to Spain for a study abroad trip, and we had to take a train ride out to Hewlett-Packard. It took us about an hour, and all the students started going through this rap song. It was like 10 minutes long, and they're going through this rap, and they were doing a great job. When they finished, I said, wow, that's amazing. I said, don't tell me you can't learn a 15-word definition. You can do it. You can memorize stuff. If you do things in rhymes or some way to connect it, it's easier for you to remember. Here's a really good way is to develop acronyms. Anybody recognize the acronym HOMES? What is that? The names of the 5 Great Lakes. I never remembered the 5 Great Lakes the first time I saw this acronym. I've had it ever since. It's there. All right? H is for Huron. O is for Ontario. M is for Michigan. E is for Erie. S, Superior. Right. What's Roy G. Biv? The colors of the rainbow. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And then one of my graduate students was in the hallway, and I said, okay, give me an acronym. And he came up with this, never eat soggy waffles. I thought, what? This goes way back to when you're younger. It's how to remember north, east, west, and south. But do you see, once you get that, it's vivid, it sticks. So find a way to develop an acronym. If you've got a list of stuff to memorize, take the first letter off, organize it so it's in a word that you can remember, and it helps so much. This is what we call being efficient. It doesn't take as much work. You're not going to have to work as hard to try to just memorize stuff. Another thing you can do is develop graphic organizers. It's not always a good idea to rewrite your notes because that's passive. You're just copying stuff. What I would rather you do with your time is organize it, start learning it, and then if we need to pull stuff together to see how they all fit into the big picture, then we're going to do these graphic organizers. These are sometimes called maps. They show relationship. They use patterns, color, or placement to aid memory. Here's an example of a simple kind of map. Now see, you could do a flashcard, right, with these 3 definitions, but those 3 definitions don't show you how those words relate. Do you see how this is much better? Because this is showing the pattern of how it's connected. So developing a map is a much easier way of trying to remember stuff. Plus, you're working with it as you're trying to figure out how to do the map. So you're actively working with the material, developing these maps, and this is going to help you out. This is a really good one. I found this one, and I wasn't real sure what this was about at first. Again, you know, I didn't remember all my history like I should have, so I looked it up. Thank goodness for Google, right? If you lose it, go look it up. What this is looking at, the 14 points, is talking about the speech that Woodrow Wilson gave to convince people that the World War I had good aims, right? That this was going to be a good thing. And these were the points that he addressed in 1918 in his speech. Then, probably in this history class, they spent a lot of time talking about the points in his speech. Then they said, all right, the World War I came to an end, and we had the Treaty of Versailles. And then we started listing the things that the Treaty of Versailles had. That's kind of hard to remember all that stuff. But do you see how nice this is? Each one of these statements represents information that you've already learned because you've already studied this little process, so you've got all the nuggets. You understand the terms. You've learned all the pieces. This puts it together for you so you can see how they fit together. Really good question to get in history class is compare and contrast Wilson's 14 points with the Treaty of Versailles. This is fabulous. Is this easy to remember? Because it takes each of these 6 concepts and then allows you to compare them and to see how they compare. Now, even not knowing anything about this, doesn't that give you a lot of information on it? Does this make it easier for you to remember? This probably represents 10 or 12 pages of lecture notes. How hard is it to remember 10 or 12 pages of lecture notes? So by developing a graphic organizer or mapping it out, this really helps. Now, here's the other thing that was done with this. These 6 key concepts, how do you remember those? Here's an acronym that enables you to remember. You can remember the 6 concepts. You then can compare and contrast between what happened in one speech, what was promised in one speech, versus what was actually done in the treaty. By working on your information and putting it together like this, you're actively working with it. You're not going to have to pull an all-nighter, because by the time it gets time for the test, you've already learned a great deal of information. Here's another simple map. Makes it easier to remember, compare with other species. Here's a map. Now, what I would probably do on this map with these arrows, I would probably number them so that there's a sequence. When you first look at this, if you're not real sure what happens next, the numbering would help you make sure that you get the sequence in order. See how much easier this is? I could write down all these steps on a piece of paper. That's harder to remember. This little picture is really easy to replicate, and you can work from this picture so that you get it. Here's a little map of the government. I would do boxes. I would make the layout a little clearer. I would use color, because color, you actually remember, oh yeah, that box was in the upper left-hand corner and it was green, and you're going to remember what it said. All of those things help your brain to recall stuff. Here's a messy one from my economics class. Production Possibilities Frontier gave the definition. Here are the 3 assumptions right here. Then I said if those assumptions change, so here's what happens if the assumptions change and the result. So that makes an easy way to look at relationships and remember different things. Next step in learning, review, review, review. When I talk about time management, it isn't just about learning stuff before the test. You're going to be actively learning as you go. You're going to take advantage of what's in your short-term memory today, push more of it into long-term memory. So by the time it's time for a test, you already know most of it. What does that do to your anxiety level? Way down. You don't get near as anxious. How productive are you when you're not as anxious? Much more productive, absolutely. So, review notes before you, after each class, before you go to bed. You're going to revise them. You're going to start the learning process with that 2-column method. You're going to then prepare for class, the next class, by reading that text before you walk in. You get the introduction before you go to class, which means when you're in class, you're learning it. You're not being introduced to it. You're actually learning it. So you're deepening your learning by what's happening in class. Then, before you go to the next class, make sure you review what you did in the last class right before you walk into class. So you're reloading your short-term memory before you walk into class so that when you continue the discussion, you've got something to build on. It's real common. I see this in my students all the time. We'll come into class, we'll get ready to start, and I'll ask a question. And invariably, some of the students flip back in their notes to come up with the answer, but it doesn't do you any good if it's in your notes. If you've already got what happened last week in your head, you can answer from your head. As you're hearing new things, what are you doing? You're building on what you already know. You're synthesizing with what you already know. If it's in your notes, it's harder to build. Your framework is not there. So review right before you go into class. So do you see how this is going to impact your time management? Second thing, you need to recite. Make sure you, when you're trying to learn something, say it out loud. Some students instinctively know this. If you're going to remember it, you're going to say it because it makes it stick better than if you just think it. So, passive learning, listening and reading. Active learning, writing and speaking. So that's why making these graphic organizers, doing your topic sheets, revising your notes, also aids in the process. Do you get bored just sitting and rereading the same notes over and over and over again? It's boring. By actually having something to do, you're actively engaged and it's not boring. It makes the time more productive. It makes it stick. Lastly, self-test your learning. You're going to fold over your lecture notes that day and start learning. Start pushing some of that information into long-term memory. And don't worry if a week later it's not there. You just repeat the process. And you keep repeating it, and you're going to find that over time you're going to remember more and more. Lastly, come up with questions before the test that force you to recall all the information. You're going to work from your topic sheets, from your maps, from your lecture notes, and you're going to practice those questions by writing down the answers and going back and checking your answer. You're going to find that most of the stuff you're already doing 100%. Then you focus your time on what you're not remembering. So you're efficient with your study time. All right, study groups. Study groups can be good. Make sure you study before you come. Make sure you work with other students who are equally passionate about learning. And then you quiz each other and see how well you get it. Now, how to get started. This is really important. You need a planner. You need one place where you write down all of your due dates. Every exam you're going to take for every class, every paper that's going to be due, every project that's due, one place. If you have other obligations, like you're in sports, you need to make sure you block out practice time, game time. Okay? Now, this is the first step. Next, now, and we can do this in two different ways. You can have one planner with everything that's set every week. This is what you're going to do. But then you can go buy one of these little cheap spiral-bound planners that has the days of the week and times set out for each day. And every week you can plan out exactly what you're going to do for that block of time based on the syllabus. Read chapter 3, answer questions, do math homework, right? And you can be very specific, especially when it comes to intermediate goals. When you have a paper due, you start working the first week. You put the first week, select topic. Week number 2, go investigate sources. Week number 3, organize basic information that I've got. Week number 4, start outline. And if you start doing and set aside time in your planner for the big project, it's going to be so much easier for you by the time it's ready for the paper to be done. Don't forget to take care of yourself. I should have added on here sleep. Sleep deprivation is a real big problem for college students. You cannot think, you cannot learn, you cannot produce if you are tired. You need enough sleep. If you're organized with your time and you use your time productively, you will have time for sleep. But you also need time for exercise, to eat, to have time with family, friends, and for church. Now, here's a little example. We've given you a planner, and this is an example of just a generic plan where I've got all my classes laid out, and I've got, right before English, review English. So I've actually got things planned out every day that I'm going to have to do. I will tell you, there's not enough hours, especially for a history class, there's not enough hours in here to get all that reading done. But notice, I don't have anything scheduled in the evenings. What's really nice is if you get everything done during the day, then you have some time off in the evenings. More than likely, you're going to find you don't get everything done. You have to think in terms of accomplishing tasks, not spending an hour. You've got to read chapter 3. Well, you've done your allotted hour. You're only halfway through chapter 3. You got to go back and finish chapter 3. So you've got to have time where you can do that makeup, because it always takes us longer to do things than we think it's going to take. This is a learning process. Next time you know, okay, I need a 2-hour block if I'm going to read a chapter. And then you adjust your schedule accordingly. You learn, you improve. But laying it out on paper really helps you keep from getting distracted, and you see at the end of the day, boy, I blew that hour. I lost the opportunity to do that study. Now I've got to make it up at another time. Your weekends are also going to be make up. But you see, you don't have time on a weekend to do all of this. All right, so in summary, remember your goal. Write your goal down. Studies show that people who write down what the goal is are much more successful in accomplishing their goal. Make sure your goal is a good one, not just the grade, not just course credit, and not just the degree. Your goal is to learn, to become a better learner, because you're going to be a learner for the rest of your life. Decide to remember. Make sure you organize your material. Make sure you associate it with things that you know. Review, review, review. You've got to make sure that you have repetition in order to really get it. You see why it doesn't work the night before the test? You could stay up all night. Can you do this the night before test? No, you can't. It's impossible. Recite. If you're trying to memorize those basics, recite them out loud. You'll get them in your brain and keep them longer, faster, so it'll be more efficient. Lastly, don't do the yup method of studying. You're looking at your notes and you're going through and you're saying, yep, I know that, yep, I know that. You have to test your recall to make sure you can come up with the information. A good way to do that is mix up the questions, do them out of order. Go through them and do them, and then put it away and come back 24 hours later and do them again and see how much is in long-term memory. And then you start focusing on those things that are tripping you up. You're not spending time on stuff you know, because you know it. So then when you walk into the test, what happens? You're more confident, you know you've got skills, you're more comfortable, you're not going to have test anxiety, you're going to be able to perform better. We're going to have other workshops. We're going to talk more about how to pull information out of a textbook. We're going to talk more about how to study for tests, how to actually get in there and do those things that will help you remember before a test, how to evaluate what you do on a test. Does anybody have any questions? Anything I didn't address or anything? Did you make any question marks on your notes? No? Well, thank you so much for coming. I enjoyed visiting with you. And if you have any further questions, feel free to contact me, and I'll be glad to help you out. Thanks.